Thank you. Thank you again for inviting me here today. My presentation, I've been asked to speak about a project that my colleagues and I conducted actually several years ago. It was kind of one of the first studies to really quantify the benefits of green infrastructure. And we did the study in Philadelphia. So I'm going to talk about the study, and I'm going to talk about, actually, my next slide says what I'm going to talk about. But I am going to talk about each of the benefits that we looked at, and I'll focus a little bit more on the actual methods that we used, a little bit more than, and we did things a little bit differently than some of the other things you've heard today. And although it's a study in Philadelphia, I really want to, I guess, stress, I'll kind of point out the valuation methods that we used. There's lots of similarities. I think a lot of the same methods could apply in the Boulder region. I also, at the end of my presentation, I'll give some other examples from other communities, and I'll talk about some specific studies that I think are even more relevant. So we'll try to tie things back. So the project that we did in Philadelphia, it's what we call a triple bottom line analysis, and basically triple bottom line analysis is it's the same thing as a benefit cost analysis. I'm an environmental economist, so to me it is a benefit cost analysis. But it attempts to quantify and at least qualitatively assess things that you can't quantify, things like social benefits and environmental benefits. So not only looking at the financial aspects, costs and benefits of a project or program, but also taking into account those other important things that we've been talking about today. Triple bottom line, this is just kind of a graphic here. If you can see a lot of times traditionally we've gone off after what's the cheapest thing to do. Let's implement that. And you can see here that dot is supposed to be a representative of the benefits of a project. And you can see the yellow part's really big. That represents the financial part. Traditionally that's been a lot of the way we do things because we haven't quantified those other benefits. But we know now, and what most of this discussion has been about today, is that there are all these other benefits that we can quantify. When we start taking those into account, things that may cost a little more or cost the same, and in some cases with green infrastructure it's even cheaper, but even if they do cost a little bit more, we're getting a much better return. So I'll start by just providing a little bit of a background on what Philadelphia was doing. So we did this study, actually we initiated it back in 2008. And Philadelphia was one of the first cities in the U.S. to kind of plan out a really aggressive green infrastructure program. I mean, a citywide, at the citywide level. And their driver was they had combined sewer overflows. So they had to meet requirements under the U.S. Clean Water Act. And they had a choice. They said, well, we can do this with just complete gray infrastructure, or we can take a different approach and we can look at green infrastructure, and we can look at a mix of the two. So what they asked us to do, and this was before a lot of people had implemented green infrastructure, so they really didn't know, it took a little convincing. They had to convince regulators, and part of that convincing was looking at all these other benefits. So what they did, they gave us a bunch of different alternatives to analyze, and they said, okay, well, here's 4 different kind of green/gray approaches. We're going to do a mix of the two. And then they gave us, I think about we had 17 alternatives in total. So we looked at, I think, 13 different options that just were, completely gray infrastructure, a mix of different kinds of gray infrastructure. So the 4 alternatives that they were looking at were basically just different levels of green. And they were based on the percentage of stormwater that green infrastructure would capture. So for example, today as I go through my examples, I'll talk about the 50% green alternative, which means 50% of the stormwater runoff that they would need to manage would be captured through green infrastructure. The rest would be captured through gray. Their program included all sorts of different green infrastructure types. I mean, again, it's a huge city, so they're implementing whatever fits where. So they had trees, green streets, green roofs, a whole host of things. One of their other categories, or one of the other programs that they did with this, was a pretty big stream restoration program. And so they opened up the stream channels, which had become channelized. That also resulted, I'll talk about in a lot of additional benefits. So as I mentioned, this is you don't have to read all these numbers, but this is a big aggressive plan. So I just wanted to give you the scale of what we're talking about here. So the green alternative that I'll highlight today, the 50%, I have LID up there. That stands for low impact development. We kind of use those words interchangeably throughout our project. But you can see, over 600,000 trees they plan to plant, 402 acres of green roofs, and so on. So it's a pretty ambitious project. And I guess I should go back. So we compared it to, for my purposes today, I'm going to compare it to a gray-only alternative, which actually cost about the same. So we're going to compare the benefits for two alternatives that are basically the same in terms of cost. And that was, building big tunnels. So just an overview, I'll go through each benefit and talk a little bit more about the valuation methods that we used. But our first step was to really, assess all those program components. That slide I showed, wetlands, trees, open space, and then map that to some of the different, what we call the triple bottom line outcomes. So, what do you get when you put a bunch of green roofs up? You reduce energy, and I'll show a slide on that. So we map kind of all the benefits. Our analysis included what we called the external costs and benefits. There was a separate analysis going on that looked at the engineering costs, costs of energy, things like that. So our focus was really on the benefits, things that aren't typically included in a benefit cost analysis. We used standard environmental economic approaches, models. A lot of our models, we used what was kind of the precursor to the iTree model to get energy savings from trees and things like that. So we use very standard approaches to get at these benefits. We looked at benefits over 40 years. So when I present numbers going forward, you're looking at cumulative benefits over 40 years. We applied discount rate and interest and or inflation. Sorry. So that's what I'll be presenting today. We looked at things in both physical and monetary units. So when we quantified things like energy savings, we would say, we save X amount of kilowatts, but then we also put a monetary value on that. We were also pretty careful to, think about how our assumptions influence the analysis, and if we change some of those assumptions, how would that affect our results, and we documented that too. Oops. I'm not very good with slides. Obviously, I put that in the wrong order. So, so this is what I was talking about, the triple bottom line outcome. So on the left there, you can see some of those different program components, the ones that are highlighted. We mapped those to the different benefits, to the different triple bottom line benefits. So you can see watershed restoration. Is that the first one? It's hard for me to see. In wetlands, obviously they have water quality benefits, all sorts of, there's recreation, there's aesthetic benefits. So the first step was just to get a handle on how all these things are linked. What do the program components result in? We did the same thing for those other green components, which result in even more benefits. We also looked at it for the gray. So, obviously the gray alternatives would result in benefits. They would result in water quality benefits, but you wouldn't get a lot of that, those other things that we've been talking about all morning. The gray would also, I'll talk about this a little bit, but through construction, it would also kind of increase carbon footprint. So we documented the net costs and benefits too. So this is just the final list of things, and I'll go through each one of these here, that we were able to quantify. They're specific to Philadelphia. One of the things we didn't look at was flooding, because flooding is not a problem there. It does seem like it is here, so that would be something that we'd want to look at quantifying if we were to do something similar here. So the first one, and you can see it, I broke these out into the three triple bottom lines, and I'll go through, I think, the social ones first here. But the first one is recreation. So we've heard a little bit about, I think Phil even mentioned, when he goes down his Central Avenue, there's people walking because it's a lot cooler. When you add green space to parks, you get more people going there. In Philadelphia, I mentioned the stream restoration program. When you're changing you know, a channelized stream that's kind of overgrown into a nice area that you can access, you're going to get a lot more people to access that area. So what we did, and what environmental economists do, is they value recreation a lot. And what we do is there was, luckily for us, there was a lot of data in Philadelphia on how often people visit the parks there, and how much they're willing to pay to actually take part in recreational activities. And that's information that actually can be done pretty easily through surveys. You know, sometimes it can be expensive, but a lot of times there's data that you can draw on from other places and kind of apply to your area. So what we looked at is, you know, so how many additional days would people recreate because of these new amenities? Maybe there's more accessible area in their neighborhood. And then we applied once we figured that out, we applied the value that they place on those trips. And again, that was obtained through a survey. And they're actually pretty low. You know, if someone might pay, you know, I think in Philadelphia it ranged from like $3 to $10 for different types of activities just to go visit a park on one day. You know, depending on the activity, it's going to be a lot more in some circumstances if you're boating or something like that. But it's not a huge number. But you know, if you go to the park once a week and everyone in Philadelphia does it, it adds up. So it is a real amenity. And so in Philadelphia, what we found was that there's going to be, this is again over 40 years. So a lot more people are going to go visit these areas, get outside. We looked at, you know, those areas where they're opening up they're doing the water or the stream restoration, and then areas where they're just doing street trees, things like that. A lot of new user days, and we applied that value and found a pretty large number there. And what this really amounts to kind of put it in perspective, they have a pretty good park system there. A lot of it's not maintained very well, but it would, this program we estimated would increase park usage by about 6% per year. Another benefit that we looked at is increase in property values. And this is something actually I've heard several people at the conference, you know, talking to me about, well, how do we convince our developers to actually build this? Well, this is a good way to do it. This is one of those benefits that accrues to the private property owner, and you know, taxes and things it can also accrue to. It's a public benefit as well. So we were able to quantify, just looking at existing literature. There's a lot of literature out there on how property values increase with vegetation and well-planned, you know, landscape design. Generally, it's been found to be between 2 and 5%. So we just applied the midpoint of that to get a range and to say, you know, what kind of magnitude are we looking at? You know, we took into account where the green infrastructure would be located and within the city, and we applied it to the median home value of the city. Now, one thing with property value benefits is that there's a lot of other things tied up in property value benefits. So if you're looking at that and you're also looking at other benefits, you want to be careful not to double count. So what we did, you know, because for example, your property value may increase because of green infrastructure if there's increased recreation opportunities in near your home, and so that you can kind of start double counting. So just to get a magnitude and to do away with that, we assumed about 50% of the property value benefits would be solely due to increased aesthetics. So we're hoping, you know, we're avoiding most double counting that way. Another thing we looked at is urban heat stress reduction. So this is an issue obviously everyone's been talking about, and it seems to be quite important here. So in Philadelphia, it's also very important. They've had several excessive heat events that have resulted in a lot of deaths, and they've done a lot of work towards warning people and developing excessive heat programs. So this was also a very important benefit for them. So what we found, we were able to, and I have to admit, so this is, you know, I helped in the valuation part of this. There's a lot of science that goes behind this. You know, they were able to kind of determine, well, you know, if we increase vegetation by X amount, we kind of tied that to our 50% alternative and say vegetation would increase by X amount, and we were able to calculate how that would reduce future temperatures at the city level. And it's not even that much. I mean, you know, Phil talked about how, you know, just under the trees it's 27 degrees in Phoenix, but at the citywide level it's not even that much, but it is enough to result in fewer deaths. You kind of shave the peak off those excessive heat events and result in fewer deaths. Now, economists and EPA have a way of putting a dollar value on that. It's something that, you know, a lot of people a controversial thing, and it's not intended to really say, this is what your life is worth or anything like that. It's more to be able to include apples to apples and say, it's more to get people thinking in terms of, well, the value of reducing those deaths is a lot greater than the cost. So what EPA calls it is the value of a statistical life, and it's based on risks people are willing to take in their jobs and evidence of how they make choices. So that's a very big benefit there. But over the 40-year time period, I think the more important part is that it would save, we estimate, about 196 lives just by increasing the vegetation. I think it was up to 15%. So obviously a big benefit. I'll go through this one really quick because we heard a lot about this morning. But we also used, at this time it was the precursor to the iTree model. Or no, I'm sorry, actually. Well, I'll talk a little bit about this. We did use the precursor to the iTree model to figure out the air quality pollutant removal benefits from the street trees. And we took into account, how trees grow over time and, not all of them will survive. We took those things into account. And we were able to determine, that this is kind of the same thing that this slide we saw this morning, but how many reduced deaths, heart attacks per year as a result of planting all this new vegetation. Then we were able to apply a monetary value, same as we saw this morning, to that in terms of, what's the cost of the illness, and that those would now be avoided. Another thing, and this is one of those harder things to value, is what's the value of water quality. Sometimes the value of water quality is you can estimate it or look at it in terms of how much does this reduce the need for a city to treat water. You can look at it in terms of avoided costs. But in this case, we weren't just getting an increase in water quality. We were getting an increase in aquatic habitat due to all the stream restoration. And one way that economists measure that is looking at how people value that. So what they say they're willing to pay for these water quality improvements. So we looked at a lot of different studies. We didn't have the time or the money to do our own original survey. But we did a study. We looked at the existing literature and said, what have other studies shown that people are willing to pay for water quality improvements in their area? And we applied it to the situation in Philadelphia. So we took into different things like the income of Philadelphia residents, how close they were to the water body. So people, inside the immediate area were closer. They have a higher value. People outside the city who have access to other, kind of in the suburbs, have access to other water bodies, have a little lower value. It depends on how much, access you already have. And the improvements under the green infrastructure alternative, we estimate people would be willing to pay about $10 to $15 per year per household, which isn't a ton of money in Philadelphia, but when every Philadelphia household is paying that every year, that's a large benefit. The next thing, and I think this is, I'll mention a study here at the end. Well, I'll mention another study that we did that I think is even more applicable to this region. One of the things that in Philadelphia, and this is going to be unique to every community, but in Philadelphia they really worked hard, or they're working hard to hire, I guess the idea is that green infrastructure and gray infrastructure, especially when you're doing gray infrastructure that requires a lot of technical building, you need to bring someone in from outside the local region. A lot of times it's a large engineering company who comes in and brings their own workers. It doesn't result in a huge benefit for the local community. Philadelphia kind of made an effort to target unemployed people, people who would otherwise not be employed. For a lot of them, you didn't have to have these specialized tunneling skills to plant trees and implement the green infrastructure. So we assumed that there would be a certain percentage of people that would otherwise be unemployed. That when you employ those people, you reduce the cost of social services that those people would otherwise be accessing. And in Philadelphia, that amounts to about $10,000 per year per worker. So over the life of the project, you're getting that social benefit there. I think we just did a study, and it was for Washington, D.C., so a very different community. But the idea, I think, is the same. So we just did a study looking at the local economics the local economic impacts of green and gray. And the idea is the same. The idea is that green infrastructure, you can draw on a lot more, and it'll be different in every community, but in DC we found, you can draw a lot more on local resources, including employees. And you can also, in DC there's a lot of small businesses forming around these green infrastructure techniques, green roof businesses. You can also access a lot more of the materials locally. And there's a lot of economic development that can occur in that way. So it's something to think about when you're thinking about designing a program. It's another benefit there. We've heard a lot about this morning too, so I won't spend too much time in it, but this is just the cooling and heating savings that result from planting trees in strategic areas. We assumed, can't remember the exact percentage we assumed would result in these heating and cooling effects, but we didn't assume all trees and vegetation would do that, but a lot of them would. And so we looked at the energy saved over time, both fuel and natural gas. We also looked at, as a result of those energy savings, how that would reduce associated emissions and the impacts of that in terms of health impacts. And we applied EPA values to look at those health impacts, or applied those EPA values for the cost of those illnesses to look at the costs that we're avoiding with green infrastructure. We've also heard about the carbon footprint. For both alternatives, we looked at the change in carbon footprint, and we took into account, obviously when you're constructing things, and this is a huge construction program, and it's going to be implemented over 40 years, you're going to increase CO2 emissions a little bit, driving around, digging things up. That's with both the green and the gray, but with the green, you're also getting your additional carbon storage. And we were able to put a value on that, once you figure out the net emissions. We used what they call the social cost of carbon, and applied that value to the reduction in emissions over time. And the social cost of carbon is something that we use a pretty conservative estimate, but the International Panel on Climate Change kind of comes out with this value. It looks at the damages that carbon can cause, and it's a per ton value. Another thing we looked at. Like I said, this is going to be a huge program. There's going to be impacts not only in terms of energy use and carbon, but it's going to disrupt a lot of traffic. It's not, compared to a lot of the other costs and benefits, it's not going to be huge. But this is a cost, actually. We're looking at the cost of constructing in terms of traffic disruption. That results in, people having to slow down. It's a drain on their time. You can value that time. We estimated the amount of time that people would lose in traffic under both green and gray alternatives. And we also estimated, actually I should have said, back in my energy savings and emissions calculations, we estimated how much gas would be wasted and the emissions associated with that. This is a small cost in compared to the benefits, but we did take it into account. So I don't expect you to look at every number in this table, but I just wanted to show you what I was talking about. I mentioned, we looked at the physical benefits. So we looked at things like the change in recreational user days, the reduction in heat-related fatalities, the number of local, what we called green jobs, electricity savings, and so on and so forth. So we looked at those physical units, and you can see on the left-hand side, the 50% green alternative, really the take-home message is it results in a lot more benefits than the 30-foot tunnel alternative that we looked at, the big tunnels that capture the stormwater. Kind of the take-home message is there's all these other benefits. Under the 30-foot tunnel alternative, but you have increased emissions, you have sulfur dioxide, increased carbon, and increased construction disruption. And this is just a table of the actual total value of the benefits over time. So again, over the 40-year time period, the net present value, the 50% option obviously has much greater benefits there, and that's in millions of dollars. So I just want to touch on, I don't have too much time left, but I want to touch on, some other examples that we found of cities that are closer to this area. And I also want to touch on the fact that this kind of study is really like the Cadillac of studies of benefits. There are it was a big study. They were undertaking a huge program. Green infrastructure hadn't been implemented like this, so they invested a lot in this study. But there's other ways that you can do similar studies that don't require as many resources. Maybe you don't need to quantify every single benefit. Maybe you are focused on one benefit. Maybe urban heat stress is something that you really want to focus on, and you can use existing literature and kind of apply findings from there. We did not recently. It was relatively recently published a report with EPA, the Office of Watersheds, Oceans, and Wetlands, and it's out now. That's a picture of it. I should put the website up here, but if you Google the case studies of green infrastructure economics, I'm sure it'll come up, and I'm sure it's on the EPA website. It is. We looked at a bunch of different communities, 13 different communities in the U.S., and did in-depth case studies of how they've assessed the economic benefits of green infrastructure. And each community is unique. I think some of the relevant examples is, there's not a lot in, near this region. So I think that's one limitation, but I think there definitely could be. There was a good study that was done in Sun Valley watershed in Los Angeles. San Diego is currently undertaking a study as well. They're really looking at the benefits that developers and private property owners can get. They are kind of just starting it, so it's not out yet, but hopefully when they're completed, they can share their findings, and we'll learn something from that. But again, I think this study is really useful, I think, in that it gives you different options. It presents the case studies, and then we wrote a summary and kind of guidance about how you can use some of the same different economic methods. So in some cases, one community just wanted to look at property values. There's certain objectives. Depending on your objectives, you may need just a different kind of economic analysis. So this document really helps to kind of lead you through what you need and how you can do that. And I think that's all I have. So.